In almost every observation and experiment, we get our information through photons. Sometimes the number of photons can be so low that we need to multiply their count to even see them. For this job, we use photomultiplier tubes. Let's learn how they work. The main purpose is to detect even a single photon that reaches the detector and turn it into an electrical signal. To do that, we rely on the photoelectric effect. This effect tells us that if a photon interacts with a lattice, it can transfer its energy to an electron and cause it to eject. This ejected electron is called a photoelectron. Let's look at this exact phenomenon step by step. When a photon encounters a material, it travels through it. If the material has enough thickness, the photon will eventually hit an atom or an electron. If it hits the lattice itself, the photon's energy transfers into phonons, heat, and disappears. But if we are lucky, the photon hits an electron. If the material is a conductor, the electron is already in the conduction band, so the photon transfers all its energy into the kinetic energy of that electron. The electron then starts moving outward. Again, if we are lucky, it doesn't collide with any other free electrons or the crystal lattice, and reaches the edge of the material still holding onto some kinetic energy. If this kinetic energy is greater than the energy mountain at the edge, which we scientifically call the work function, it can escape. This energy mountain exists because the atoms at the very surface of the material cannot form bonds with the empty vacuum. This abrupt end to the crystal structure creates a barrier, increasing the potential energy that an electron must overcome. If the electron has enough energy to climb this mountain, it successfully escapes into the vacuum. In other words, it ejects. From these steps, we can draw a few conclusions. The photon's frequency is highly important for the electron to overcome this work function barrier. However, if the material is a standard conductor, the probability of ejecting an electron is extremely low, even if the photon's frequency is high because of all those collisions. But we can do something to increase this probability. We can use a semiconductor. In a steady state, the conduction band of a semiconductor is practically empty. When a photon hits an electron in the valence band, the electron jumps to the conduction band, and the rest of the photon's energy turns into kinetic energy. Because the conduction band is empty, the electron can travel to the surface without crashing into a sea of other free electrons. This drastically increases the probability of ejection. We can push this even further. We can coat the semiconductor's surface with a single atom-thick layer of a material that has a very low work function. This basically lowers the energy mountain at the edge. So, even if the electron loses some kinetic energy by colliding with the crystal lattice along the way, it can still slide out and escape from the material. Now that we have caught our single electron, we need to multiply it. As we know, a photon has enough energy to eject electrons, but an accelerated electron, bearing high kinetic energy, can also eject other electrons when it collides with a material. This phenomenon is called secondary emission. Using this principle, the photoelectron ejected from the photocathode is accelerated by an electric field and crashes into a material, forcing it to eject even more electrons. This chain reaction is arranged one after another. At the end of the chain, there is an anode that collects all these electrons. This massive collection of electrons creates an electrical current. When this current flows through a resistor, it generates a measurable voltage pulse. By reading this pulse, we can determine exactly how many photons arrived and when they arrived. This is the overall logic of photomultiplier tubes. Let's build one up, step by step. Firstly, we need a photocathode, carefully chosen and coded for the specific photon frequency we want to measure. We place it right here at the entrance. When a photon ejects an electron from the photocathode, that electron has a random velocity, so we need to focus it. For focusing, we use a process similar to an electron gun. We use a metal focusing electrode that creates an electric field, acting like an invisible funnel. The electrons naturally want to follow this electric field path, so they are perfectly guided towards the next stage. After focusing, we finally start to multiply the electrons. To do this, We can use various architectures like linear focused, circular cage, Venetian blind, or microchannel plates. These methods have their own specific use cases, which we will see later. Let's build a linear focused type for now. We call the materials that the electrons hit to multiply diodes. The first diode has a more positive voltage compared to the focusing area, so it actively pulls the electron in the vacuum. The electron accelerates towards the first diode, gaining massive kinetic energy. When it collides, that extra energy causes the surface to eject multiple secondary electrons. To multiply these newly ejected electrons, we use a second diode with an even higher positive potential. It pulls the electrons from the first one. Again, they collide with high kinetic energy, ejecting even more electrons. This cycle repeats down to the final diodes. After the electrons are ejected from the final diode, the anode pulls them with the highest potential in the entire tube. But there is a critical difference between a diode and an anode. We want to collect all the electrons in the anode to measure them as a current. We must avoid ejecting new ones. Therefore, the anode is made of a durable material with a high work function that absorbs electrons without causing secondary emission. This flow of collected electrons passes through a load resistor, creating a voltage difference that we can read on an oscilloscope over time. Finally, we can observe even a single quantum of light just by measuring this voltage peak. Of course, the environment for all of this is crucial. The tube must be a strict vacuum because electrons are traveling inside, and we don't want them colliding with air molecules and losing energy. So, we seal everything inside a glass tube. We must also choose the correct type of glass window that can transmit the specific incident photon frequency. If the glass blocks the photon, the photocathode can't eject an electron, and we measure nothing. So, this is basically how a photomultiplier tube works. But where do we use them? Before answering, let's define the timing of these actions. The time gap between a photon interacting with the photocathode and the measurement of the voltage pulse is called transit time. However, ejected electrons don't all travel the exact same path or with the exact same starting energy. It is somewhat random. So, if two photons hit the photocathode at the exact same time, their resulting electron avalanches will reach the anode with a slight time gap between them. This uncertainty is called transit time spread, or jitter. Furthermore, when millions of electrons reach the anode, they don't arrive at the exact same picosecond. They form a wave. This creates a smooth transition in our voltage measurement. The time it takes for the signal to reach its peak is called rise time, and the overall duration is the pulse width. These time differences dictate where we use specific photomultiplier tubes. For instance, PMTs are heavily used in astrophysics for catching extremely weak, rare events, like Cherenkov radiation from neutrinos. In these massive observations, transit time spread is not very important. We just want to detect a few rare photons coming from the cosmos. For this, we must maximize the detection area. To achieve massive collection areas, the photomultiplier architecture is modified into the Venetian blind design. But experiments in the quantum world require extreme precision. In a quantum experiment, the exact picosecond a photon arrives is critical, and the randomness of transit time spread is our biggest enemy. To fix this, the device is shrunk. The focusing electron paths are tightened, and in advanced models like microchannel plates, the distance between multiplication stages is reduced to microscopic levels. A linear-focused or microchannel architecture is used to ensure the path of the ejected electrons is as identical as possible. In the end, photomultiplier tubes do not have a single standard design. They are completely modified depending on the field of study. I hope this video was helpful in understanding how we hunt for photons. Thank you for watching, and remember, science is liberty.